Coming up next, an interview with the former Philippine foreign minister who's opposed to the Marcos regime. A representative to appear on our broadcast tonight to speak for President Marcos, but our invitation was declined. Joining us now via satellite from Frankfurt is Raul Manglapus, who was in the Philippine Senate with Benigno Aquino and who is also a former Philippine foreign minister. Senator Manglapus is a founder of the Movement for a Free Philippines, an organization of political moderates who oppose President Marcos. He is currently living in exile in Switzerland. Senator Manglapus, one of the main questions tonight is who is behind the murder of your friend Benigno Aquino? Who do you think is behind it?
Well, I think we should say that the guilt has to be shared by several sectors. One would be the Filipinos and Filipino Americans who continue to be reluctant to join in a solid non-violent movement for the restoration of democracy in the Philippines. The other share has to go to American policy.
No, wait a moment. I'm going to let you develop your theme, certainly, but I'd like a direct answer to the question about who told the trigger man to go out there and pull the trigger. More precisely, do you think Ferdinand Marcos had a hand in it?
My experience in the manipulations by Marcos of Philippine politics tells me to answer that question in the affirmative. I think it is Ferdinand Marcos who manipulated the situation in the same way that he produced for himself an artificial emergency to justify his declaration of martial law.
Now, of course, he warned Aquino not to come back. Can he not logically say that he warned Aquino that he might be assassinated if he came back, and Aquino did it over that warning?
I think we can turn that statement around and say if he knew that Aquino was, that there was a plot to assassinate Aquino as early as about 2 or 3 weeks ago, he could have provided better security when Aquino landed 2 days ago.
All right, let me let you go ahead now and develop your thesis that the United States policy somehow is involved in this tragic event.
Well, let me put it this way. I think that those soldiers who boarded that plane to yank Mr. Aquino out were self-assured that behind them were not only Ferdinand Marcos and his government, but also the United States. Those soldiers, as well as the rest of the armed forces of the Philippines, have a very special regard for American power. We have had a rather unique history with you, as you know. And you can be sure that they have already been told about the $900 million that President Reagan has promised Marcos, about the forthcoming visit of Mr. Reagan, in which it is expected he will embrace Mr. Marcos again. I'm inclined to disagree with my friend Dick Holbrook's assessment that American support, or rather the money that goes to the Philippines, should not be regarded as support for Marcos. I think he's making a distinction that simply is not justified by the reality.
Well, all right, let's put it another way. The United States needs the Philippines. Would you disagree with that?
I do not disagree with any. I'm not in a position to debate the military significance of those bases. I'm not a military expert. I do say, however, that it is time to call the bluff. Mr. Marcos is bluffing when he says to you, Americans, that if you do not give him $900 million, he will go to the Soviets. We, Filipinos in exile, and I should add perhaps that I do not live in Switzerland, I live in Washington, D.C. I'm here for a conference. We would like to see the day when Mr. Marcos is forced to tell his army, well, there's nothing more coming from the United States, therefore tomorrow, don't worry, we will go to the Soviets.
All right, let's look at President Reagan's planned visit to the Philippines. Would you have him cancel that also as part of this abandonment of Marcos that you're developing?
I think that is the only thing to do at this point is to send at least some symbolic gesture, namely the cancellation of the visit. We, in the past, have been trying to get the United States to send some symbolic message, like, for instance, the reduction of the money that President Carter promised Mr. Marcos in the amount of $500 million. We got it reduced in the House of Representatives by $5 million. But when it got to the Senate, the entire State Department, including my friend Mr. Holbrooke, lobbied against it because they felt that it would send a wrong signal not only to the Philippines but to the rest of the region.
Senator Manglapus, we're going to have to take a break here, but we're going to continue our discussion with you in just a moment. The effect of Benigno Aquino's murder. What's going to happen in the next few days, in your opinion, in the Philippines?
Well, there will be a disillusionment, disappointment, and perhaps desperation. I agree with those who surmise that there may be a more rapid radicalization of the younger elements of the so-called moderate. I'm not too fond of that word moderate, but let's say democratic opposition. And there will be a period of uncertainty. There certainly will have to be some self-re-examination among Filipinos and hopefully among the Americans too. But the next few days will tell whether the assassination will bring about in the Philippines what almost 100 years ago Jose Rizal's execution by the Spaniards brought about. Jose Rizal, our national hero, you might recall, was not a violent man. He, like Aquino, only wanted peaceful reform, and yet his execution sparked a revolution.
Some people suggest that President Marcos may in fact try to impose some of the regimen of martial law which he lifted in 1981. Do you think that might be a reaction from him?
It is a possibility. He's done it before and he can do it again. Let me state, however, that the exile opposition does not really seriously believe that martial law has been lifted in the Philippines, because when he did so on paper in 1981, he announced at the same time that all his decrees would continue in force in the form of the National Security Code.
Senator Manglapus, have you ever considered going back home as Benigno Aquino attempted to do?
Benigno Aquino felt that of all of us in exile, he was most called upon to do what he did, to return. After all, he did promise to return when he was allowed to leave the Philippines for an operation. I have never been under martial law in the Philippines. I left the country the day before for speaking engagements in California. My return, I consider necessary. It will come in the future, in our own time. I have always wanted to return under my own steam and on my own terms and conditions.
Will you wait until...
I will not accept any conditions from Mr. Marcos.
Will you wait until President Marcos has somehow left office?
I would say I will not only wait for him to leave office, I am doing everything we can to have him leave office as soon as possible.
Thank you very much, Senator Manglapus, for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
I'll be back.
Polls opened at 7 a.m. Voters showed up in bigger numbers than expected. But very soon, opposition candidates like Au, the one-time beauty queen who is running in the business district of Manila, started complaining about illegal tactics of the ruling KBL party.
There has been a lot of harassment. My inspectors, my watchers have been thrown out of the precincts, and I have no more people inside the polling places. So all I can say right now is I beg the people to be vigilant.
At the closing of the polls, a delegation of the National Movement for Free Elections went on an inspection tour around Metro Manila. We saw cases of opposition poll watchers who had been beaten up with soft drink bottles because they had taken pictures of people trying to vote more than once.
This camera was busted, of course, and they took the film with them because they were taking pictures of the barangay council people who were not supposed to be inside the polling place.
In one poll, a group of KBL representatives were compiling the votes without any control from the opposition. Despite the usual intimidation and fraud during election day, President Marcos may be able from now on to claim that the population has voiced a strong decision. But the events following the election will tell to what extent the vote reflects reality. Jean-François Lépine, CBC News, Manila.
Replaced by some other ballots.
Yes.
There is more to lose than an election in the Philippines. This Marcos opponent...
74 people were killed in at least 13 separate incidents. Many of the fatalities were soldiers and policemen who died in skirmishes with rebels.
Only hours after the polls closed, opposition supporters thought they had reason to celebrate. They believed they had in their grasp the makings of a stunning upset. It appeared they were going to win far more parliamentary seats than even their leaders had predicted. One of the apparent winners, a woman who ran while under house arrest, was so confident she said of President Marcos,
if he insists on carrying on his, shall I say, tyrannical ways, it might be necessary to impeach him.
Opposition supporters gathered in Manila squares.
But there is a cynicism and suspicion in this crowd. One of the supporters of the opposition said, our candidates being ahead tonight doesn't mean a thing. The election can still be stolen tomorrow.
The suspicions were well-founded. These voters were treated at a Manila hospital, saying they were beaten by Marcos supporters. Ballot boxes turned up empty before the contents could be officially counted. This woman found ballots discarded on a street.
There are hundreds of these. These are complete with the thumbprints.
Yes, they should be inside the ballot box.
The assumption is that these were just thrown out and then replaced by some other ballots.
Yes.
There is more to lose than an election in the Philippines. This Marcos opponent was surrounded by her supporters for her protection. They sang a Philippine song which has become an anthem to the murdered opposition leader, Benigno Aquino. The result of this election won't be known for days.
Ferdinand Marcos making a surprisingly strong showing. 30% of the vote is now counted from yesterday's balloting. While conceding that the opposition is doing better than expected, President Marcos insists official returns will show his party retaining control.
I think it does constitute a mandate. It's disappointing that we lost in some of the cities, but that's all.